Ihi mauri ora, I ngā mana, I ngā reo, nau mai, haere mai, karanga mai, ro rangatira mā. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai everyone, welcome. Welcome to a panel with the Green Party of Aotearoa New Zealand, with the New Zealand Labour Party, and soon the New Zealand National Party. Today, we are looking at choosing the future of public services. Welcome, thrice welcome. Mr. Brown will be with us in a moment, but you can see we're joined right now with Jan Logie and with Mr. Honourable Andrew Little. For those of you who don't know me, no Ngāti Parau te iwi, no waiapu te awa, ko Deborah te kawa tōku inga. I'm a former public servant, these days a consultant, but probably most of my time is spent in looking at the performance of institutions and the impact of politics on our public institutions. For those of you who can't see me, I am ageing rather gracefully. I am moving from my middle wahine years into my joyfully queer stage. Today I'm wearing a black top and I have short grey hair. I want to welcome our translators today as well. Thank you in advance for the work that you'll do and the mahi that you are offering us. Now, just a reminder, iti whānau, this session is being recorded and it will be available later online. And of course, there are rules about our chat. The key rule or the key kawa is manakitanga. Is that we are making our guests as welcome as we would want to be welcomed into their home at their tables. Now, before we get into the session, let me just take you through a little bit of the tikanga, how we've designed this session for you. We're going to ask our panelists to be upbeat, to be future focused, to be thinking about the public service they want to govern over the next 10 to 20 years. We've designed this session in two parts. Initially, we'll hear from each of the panelists about their vision for the public service, and then we'll run a Q&A session. That's your chance to participate, your chance to offer your pārtai, and hopefully I'll be able to secure some answers for you. Ka pai tira, I'm hoping that's exactly what you expected. We'll be finished by 1:15, and I know some of you more financially interested people would probably be looking at your phones by about 1 o'clock for a preview. So shall we get into it then? Now we have, I've organised in advance to hear from each of our panelists in alphabetical order. We were going to do it in reverse. Jan, are you happy to begin? Then we'll move to Andrew.
Sure. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Jan Logie tōku ingoa. I'm the Green Party's Public Services spokesperson and really pleased to be part of this conversation today because I believe it's a really important one for us as a country. So the Green Party understands that we all rely on public and community services and that a strong public service is the engine house for our collective aspirations, particularly the work that we need to do on climate action as well as care for the marginalised. We believe a strong public and community sector that upholds te tiriti o Waitangi is a vital part of a decent society. But we recognise that all too often essential services are under-resourced and inaccessible to many people, particularly the marginalised. So at every level, we believe that we need to make sure that the services we rely on are well-resourced, accessible to all, and held to account. So I'll briefly talk about some specific policies that we're promoting this election, and people can check this out in detail in our manifesto. So the first point is to uphold te tiriti o Waitangi throughout the approach of the public service, including by ensuring we are funding Māori organisations, iwi, hapu, and marae to run community and environmental initiatives that meet the needs and aspirations of Māori in partnership with the Crown. Affirm the importance of advocacy and monitoring done by independent commissions with expertise in an area. starting with restoring the monitoring role of the Children's Commissioner alongside its advocacy function. We're also promoting a new Oceans Commission, as well as strengthening the role of the Climate Commission. We would also appoint a task force to hold public agencies accountable for reaching their wellbeing objectives. And this, we've been really pleased to see cross-party support for the Select Committee inquiry into public management accountabilities, financial accountabilities, because we recognise that part of the problem at the moment in terms of dealing with wicked problems is that our whole system is set up in silos, and actually we're not measuring the things that matter to our communities. So we've been driving that conversation to ensure that we collectively come together to work out how do we measure the outcomes and the work to drive the progress towards our shared goals. We also want to introduce standardised career progression, pay, community secondment opportunities and training across the public sector to improve staff retention and skills development and ensure equal pay for equivalent roles. It's been our view that some of the suppression of public sector wages has driven movement across the public sector that has undermined the delivery on programs within agencies. And we want to see actually bringing together of the public service and a recognition that knowledge and background in connection to community and topic areas matters and helps strengthen delivery. And we want to provide secure, flexible, full funding arrangements for the community sector, recognising the value of the work and ensuring independence within a supportive legislative framework. And you will have seen that in the roles that we've played in government of very much wanting to strengthen the role of Māori and community and helping their information and their relationships to drive and inform government policy and work. So it's kind of a reversing of the model that we've traditionally had. And what I hear from people in the public sector, often at the ground level, their views are very, very similar to the community views, but they struggle to get those views heard up through the chain. So we want to strengthen that model of relationship between the public sector and the community at the ground level to help inform our way forward and ensure that the public service is a leader in accessibility support and hiring and appointment practices that promote the representation of disabled people, because we recognise the barriers they experience are built in right throughout our system and we need their help in removing them. That's probably my 5 minutes, but there is a lot to say, so thank you for the opportunity.
Jan, much appreciated, thank you. And I can see some questions already in the chat as a result of your whakaaro, ka pai. Andrew, your thoughts and insight, please, for our membership.
Kia ora tātou katoa, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Deb, for the introduction. Just acknowledge Jan and Simeon. And I'll just speak just briefly just about, I think, the approach that Labor has taken in its time in government. There's no question when we came into government in 2017, the public service was somewhat under-resourced. We had made the commitment to rise to some significant challenges, things like seriously addressing climate change and having a good climate change policy and framework. We did then, and we continue today, to work in close partnership with the Green Party on that, reflected in the fact that the Climate Change Minister is James Shaw. The Resource Management Act was a big area of reform. We've now just recently enacted the last of that legislation. That was a huge area, but it needed people and policy specialists and analysts to support that process. Likewise with water services, because we know that local government over time has simply failed to keep up with the needs of that area. We needed reform in that area. That needed to be resourced and staffed up, and the public service has done that. Even when we look at the health reforms, we had a choice in terms of supporting our disabled community. They were very clear. They wanted something that reflected who they were and the discrete needs that their community and Carmel Sepuloni and I established Whaikaha, the Ministry for Disabled People, so that is a ministry that reflects that community's needs. So all of those things, it was important that we had personnel in place to support those ambitious reform areas. Another, not so much a reform area, but a huge activity that we had to undertake for our international reputation and our export markets was eradicating Mycoplasma bovis. We made the commitment to do that. That had to be staffed up. That needed people, planning, project management, as well as people in the front line. We are the first country in the world to have eradicated Mycoplasma bovis. One of the critical things we did was pass the Public Service Act 2020 that was intended to change the orientation of the public service, to move away from a siloed public service and to allow greater collaboration and integration of the public service. We now have things like integrated executive boards. So for a piece of policy work that I know was absolutely at the centre of Jan's work in the first term in government, which was the Family and Sexual Violence program picked up by Malama Davidson, that has produced Te Aorere Kura, which I still think is one of the most impressive pieces of public policy thinking. We now have that backed by an interdepartmental executive board of senior public service executives who can drive the public service machinery to start to make a real difference in that area that is actually our nation's shame, and we need to continue to develop that. We've also, in terms of the public service generally, we've improved diversity and inclusion. I think I agree with Jan and the Green Party. We need a public service that reflects New Zealand and our communities and who we are, and we are doing better at that. We're by no means not there yet. We have more to do, but there is a consciousness about that, and that is being reflected in recruitment as well. We've gone a long way to reduce gender pay gaps. Again, we're not there yet, but we've significantly reduced gender pay gaps, and we have to continue to do that. One of the important roles the Public Service Commission has played is overseeing the pay equity program, which across the broader public service has already led to 10 agreements. There's about 25 more in train, but again, that work is well underway. We want to continue to do that. We've improved the legislative support for whistleblowers. The public service is the source of continuity of government. It's an important part of our democracy. But part of that is to, if public servants see things that they don't feel, that bear upon the integrity of the public service, and they don't feel they've got a channel or an avenue to disclose that, there is better protection now for that to happen, and that's an important part of the integrity of our public service. So we want to maintain that. In the end, New Zealanders have a favourable view of the public service. They have a favourable view of public servants. What they want to know is that we have a public service in its broader sense that is staffed up and supported to provide those essential services that New Zealanders need and rely on, and that they are there. And we remain committed to doing that. Kia ora tata.
Ngā mihi. Thank you, Andrew. Simeon, your thoughts and advice, please, for the members this afternoon, and welcome as well.
Thank you, and kia ora, Deb, and just want to acknowledge Andrew and Jan. It's great to see you, and thank you to the 616 people who are participating. It's a very large gathering. My name's Simeon Brown. I'm the National Party spokesperson for public services, and I just want to start by thanking everyone who's joined this Zoom for the opportunity to meet and engage, and I look forward to the Q&A a bit later as well. And I see a number of questions coming through. As the National Party Public Services spokesperson, I want to start by thanking each of you for the work that you do in our public services and the services that you provide to New Zealanders. New Zealand is currently facing some very challenging times, and I want to share a little bit about our priorities and wider priorities, and also our priorities with the public service. We find ourselves in the midst of a recession with the cost of living soaring at a rate faster than wages can keep up, mortgages becoming increasingly unaffordable, and the reality is many Kiwis are finding it hard to make ends meet, and the economy isn't working for everyone. Despite these challenges, National knows that New Zealand holds enormous potential. We're committed to getting our economy back on track, prioritising the restoration of law and order, and improving health and education outcomes for all New Zealanders. And to deliver these priorities, we know that we must work closely with the public services to ensure that we can deliver these results for all New Zealanders. Growing economy brings better jobs and opportunities, higher real incomes, lower cost of living, and enables us to afford the quality public services that all New Zealanders depend on and which they expect. National's put forward a comprehensive plan to stimulate economic growth and ensure that every New Zealander benefits from it. National is committed to continuing to invest in our public services, and we've made it clear that we will be increasing the amount of funding going into health and education each and every year to ensure that New Zealanders have the healthcare and education services that they expect. But we also need to ensure that we have a high-performing public service which is able to deliver for New Zealanders. In the past 6 years, our view is that under Labour there's been a lack of direction, resulting in significant growth in back office roles, while outcomes on the front line have been worsening. We are very clear in our position that we need to ensure that there are clear outcomes for the public service and for ministers to hold each other to account and to ensure that New Zealanders are getting the value for money that they expect from their public services. I want to make it very clear that we want to work closely with the public service. We want to ensure that if we are elected to government, public service will be respected. We will be expecting timely and expert advice. We will end needless restructures. We'll put an end to a number of the programs of work the government has been putting enormous resource into, but delivering little for, such as Three Waters, RMA reform, light rail, other projects which it's been costing significant amount of money but failing to actually deliver. We want to ensure there are clear outcomes that the public service is focused on to ensure that New Zealanders can see tangible and measurable outcomes, and that the public service can also understand clearly what the government's expectations are as we work together in delivering for New Zealanders. Times have been tough for New Zealand, but National wants to provide a clear vision for a future, and we want to work closely with the public service to ensure that we can deliver these outcomes, fixing the economy, restoring law and order, and improving education and healthcare for all New Zealanders. I look forward to engaging with your Q&A. Thank you very much.
Panel, Koto, thank you so much for those insights, and also members, thank you for the manaaki way in which that you are asking questions in the chat, and panel members, I just direct you to some of those questions. But look, I'm going to kick off our Q&A, and I've got a big question for each of you, and Simeon, I'm going to come to you first. One of our nation's greatest assets is in fact our public service. It is enduringly trusted by the nation. In fact, right at the moment, the trust and confidence ratings are at 82%. So when people experience the public service, 82% of them say they trust and they have confidence in it. What is a lower rating is people's perception. Share with us what a national government will do over the next 10 years to help reduce that gap between the perception of public service and the actual experience. Thank you, Simeon.
Thank you for that question. I think the key thing which we have been outlining in terms of our policy approach, in which we will continue to be outlining, is the need for there to be clear targets and outcomes which are shared between the government and the public service. It's something we did when we were in government last, and it's something we see as playing a really important role to ensure that the public not only have high trust and confidence, but also see the results which they expect. And I'll give you one example which we announced over the weekend, which was our policy on health, targeted better health outcomes, and the intention for us to reinstate some of the health targets which were dropped by Labour when they came into office back in 2017. One of those targets is to ensure that New Zealanders who go to the emergency department, 95% are seen within 6 hours of presenting at an emergency department. When we were in government, we were achieving that, but what has happened since then, it has now dropped to 75% of New Zealanders being seen within 6 hours, a significant drop. And the evidence is very clear that by being seen sooner, we save many lives. And so that's a clear example of where our public service, those who work in our hospitals, they are trusted, they are respected, and they are acknowledged for the work, but the outcome also needs to be there to ensure that we are working together to achieve better outcomes for all New Zealanders so they receive the health care that they need in that particular example. And that's one example, and there'll be many others as well.
Point well made, Simeon. Thank you. I think that addresses a number of the questions in the chat about how you'll join up the public service, how you'll have chief executives and ministers working together. My friend, this will be said with much aroha. You'll know there's an elephant in the room, and it is the question around cuts. And of course, the problem that cuts create for the public service, both for its ability to deliver in the future, but also the price of constant restructures. So I do want to just, I'm mindful that, you know, there are 448,000 public servants across the country. Yes, there are 60,000 of them working in the core public service, but 58% of them work in the regions. So when you talk about back office, when your party talks about back office, what do you mean? Give us some insight into what back office is for the New Zealand National Party. Thank you.
Well, there's two aspects to it. Firstly, we've seen significant increase in the core public service, which has been, I think, 15,000 additional core public servants. And the roles which have increased the fastest within that are back office functions such as communications staff, HR managers, policy analysts. And what we've expressed is a concern about how those roles have been increasing at a rapid rate, whereas what we want to, whilst at the same time, many of the key outcomes that our public service are focused on have been going backwards. We've seen worse outcomes in our health system. We've seen worse outcomes in our education system. And so our criticism has been over the significant increase in back office roles and functions, whilst at the same time, the outcomes are going backwards. And so we've been very clear, we will be an outcomes focused government. We want to see results from the public service. We'll provide the support when needed, but we are not going to stand by and have a significant growth in back office functions whilst those results continue to go backwards. So our policy, our policy that we've released so far has been that we'll be asking for savings to be found in back office roles. We will not be focused on frontline functions. We want to see more resource go into the front line, but we will be requiring chief executives of public service organisations to find savings within the back office. Similarly to the Labour Party.
Andrew, I might come to you on that, if that's okay. And then Jan, I'll come to you after that. There has been some growth in the public service, as Simeon has pointed out, but it's around about 6%. Those growth areas, though, are in your priority areas. That's not unusual for a government. Any response to that? Any thoughts on that? Then I want to come to the idea of the well-being of our public service. Thank you.
Sure. I think what was pretty clear in 2017 is that although the population of New Zealand had grown by about 600,000 people under the previous government, actually a lot of public services had not kept pace, or their capacity had not kept pace with that those services that whose job is to interact with the public. So there was investment required to bring a lot of our public services back up to a level of capacity and capability that could deliver the particular public services. The other point I would make is, I know Simeon talks about what they call the targets. It was certainly a government driven by targets. We saw targets in health targets themselves don't create capacity, they don't create capability. In fact, what we saw particularly in health is targets being used to change the way we count things as opposed to provide improved services. So for example, they had a target about waiting lists. And so if you couldn't be seen within 4 months, you didn't sit on any list. You were sent back to your GP and told not to come anywhere near the system, and the system would be ready for you when you were. And so people like that weren't counted. One of the things that Labor governments typically do, sometimes to our peril, is we prefer to count everything so we know the size of the problem and therefore what we need to commit to fix it. And we do that. And we don't see the sort of measures that I think the National Party uses as targets, we see as performance measures. So let's gauge how the system is working, but understanding that whether or not you meet a target is not a measure of whether people are getting the services that they need. So we see that that difference, and we will strive to continue to staff up the public service to provide the services that people need. We are struggling in areas, and health is one of them, but we have funded a lot more positions. We are struggling with recruitment, and that's the case around the world.
I wonder if I could just pick up this, and again, I can see a theme in the chat. There are two big themes in the chat. Well, actually, there are three. One's pay equity. The other one is about facing the long-term problems instead of just the immediate political needs. But the one, Andrew, I'd like you to address, and then Jan, is just how exhausted the service is at the moment. They did some really hard yards during COVID. Right now, the labour market is tight. There's a lot of moving going back and forth between the public and private sector and overseas. I'm going to speak for our service, saying actually our front lines are pretty exhausted. What are your thoughts about that as a group of governors?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I have to say this government has asked a lot of our public service, wherever you are. And I know we talk about frontline and back office. Actually, the frontline doesn't get to do its job without support from those who might not be people facing or service facing, but who are absolutely critical to it. We would not have eradicated Mycoplasma bovis if MPI hadn't staffed up with all their people and all the places that needed to be there. So have to be careful about that distinction. But yes, we have. And COVID, I think, put a huge strain on the public service. I know the Ministry of Health was stretched beyond capacity, and we had to staff up a lot of extra people, a lot of them on contract, a lot of them were consultants, because that's what you do when you have a shorter term need. But that has put a lot of pressure on the public service. And I know people are concerned about the pay levels and our ability to continue to match the private sector and retain people in the public service. That remains an ongoing challenge. We've done what we can, but we will continue to address those things. We are particularly concerned about addressing the gender pay gap. We're particularly concerned about pay equity, because that has been a big issue in some parts of our public services. And those things have been a priority.
Jan, your thoughts, please, your insight into taking care of the service. It's a finite resource, but also pay equity, how we advance equity for Māori and Pasifika, particularly wahine, at a time of constraint. Thank you.
Thank you. And it is a really important question, and I'm really glad that it's been brought up, because we do see it across the public sector and the community sector. People have stretched themselves to a really precarious point, putting in the efforts to keep all of us going through a really hard time. And it does often feel as if the political discussion and I get why we kind of jump to pretending we haven't been going through a pandemic, because we all just want to forget it. But it has been really tough, and I do think we have to acknowledge that. And I do think in terms of government levers around supporting the workers, it's about how we talk about our public services and our community services. It's about how we hold to the vision. It's about the pay structures, and in part it's about the relationships with the unions enabling that collective voice and collective conversation into government. And I do think that there is space in terms of the future for more work around that traditional model of high performance, high engagement, of more actively seeking to solve problems and look at how we can do better from hearing the voices of those doing the work and ensuring that they are feeding into the decision making directly, more directly. And I think I do just also want to acknowledge the issue around back office, and particularly, you know, just in my short experience working with Minister Little in government and around, you know, some of the frustrations of feeling in terms of the work, the critically important work around family violence and sexual violence, and how we had to not do things because we didn't have the policy analysts, enough policy analysts to be able to do the work. That is the reality of making change in government, is we need those people. They are at the heart of delivering on the government and the community's agenda, right? So I just specifically wanted to say that in terms of pay equity, I would like to acknowledge the number of settlements that have happened. Also acknowledge our care and support workers who are still waiting for that settlement. And we've been trying to ask questions to hurry that along because that feels quite painful that isn't resolved at the moment. But I also want to point to the work from the Human Rights Commission around the Pacific pay gap and how our ethnic pay gaps are more significant than the gender pay gap when we look at for Pākehā women and Pākehā men. So that we do need to ensure that our system is removing all discrimination. And there's quite a lot of work that's been nicely laid out for us, I think, by the Human Rights Commission that we can pick up.
Yeah, and that's useful. And in fact, the team who's supporting me doing this, what we might do is link some of those things as a resource. Andrew, Simeon, anything that you want us to link, we're really happy to do that for our members today. Simeon, I want to come back to you on pay equity. Where does that sit in your priorities? Thank you.
Well, the National Party supported the first pay equity settlement with, I think it was nurses back in 2017, which was very important. And so we'll continue to support making sure that there is equity in terms of pay throughout the public services. That is something that we'll continue to provide support for, but at the same time, we have made it clear that you know, when it comes to we are going to take a back office. We will be expecting savings from the back office, and we will be looking to put resource into frontline services. And the example I would provide is where you have the Ministry of Education, which has significantly increased its headcount, but we go to schools and they talk about the lack of teachers and the struggle to find teachers. Go to the Ministry of Health, the Te Whatu Ora has 200 communications officers, but we've had a reduction in the number of psychiatrists on the front line, helping to ensure that young people can get access to mental health, despite this government saying there would be $1.9 billion of funding to help ensure New Zealanders had better mental health support. So there is a real mismatch between what this government says they've done and what's actually happening for people on the front line. And we want to ensure that there is better frontline service delivery for all New Zealanders with clear targets, so that New Zealanders know that they are getting the outcomes that are needed for the issues that they're facing in New Zealand.
Simeon, I'm just going to ask you a question based on some of the chat. And it's about the lessons that were learned last time from the back office cuts. Which lessons are you taking into your current policy?
Well, what we've said is that our policy that we've highlighted, and is that we will be expecting the core public service to find approximately 4% savings across the baseline. So it's about twice what the government has also stated that they are going to be asking for savings from baseline expenditure. We've identified a number of departments that we won't be expecting savings to be coming from, such as police, health, education, corrections. We'll expect, if they do find savings, to be reinvesting those savings back into frontline services. But we've put a policy together. It's on our website. It's part of our tax plan. You can read through there exactly what those departments are and which ones we've excluded. Savings will be helping to support our tax plan to provide support to the squeezed middle and to working families. And for those departments that we've excluded, such as health, education, corrections, police, and some others, where savings are found, we'll be expecting them to be driving those savings into frontline services delivery.
That's useful, and thank you for pointing out where we can have a look at those policies too. Andrew, a question for you. What shouldn't the government be involved in? Where does the New Zealand Labour Party draw the line on, actually that's for iwi to deliver, or that is for hapu to deliver, the social service sector wider? Where is that point for the New Zealand Labour Party?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's a line that's very difficult to draw. I think the role that the state ought to be playing is to at least assist in transition. So one of the reasons we set up Te Aka Whaiora, the Māori Health Authority, is not only because the health outcomes for Māori are so abysmally poorer than pretty much the rest of the population. There needs to be a way where Māori can do their leadership and lead their people in that particular area to make a difference, and that includes the health, kaupapa Māori health services that the government funds, but it is for Māori to define what the best way that is for, and therefore what the funding is that's needed. Whānau order goes a long way to assist with that too. In fact, what we're starting to see, I think, is coming together of Whānau order and the Māori Health Authority and working out what that future looks like. So the government should be there supporting, and that's just in fulfillment of its treaty obligations, but it should hand over the leadership to Māori in that respect. If you think about a thing like climate change, I was just at a conference this morning, the Wind Energy Association conference, and talking there about that, because the question came up, well, does the state have a role to help with that transition? And I think where something is urgent and our top priority, the state should be involved in that to assist the transition. Ultimately, the electricity market will work out through its pricing and its distribution and what have you, how that will settle down, and the state should step out at that particular point. But when it comes to the new technology that's going to be carbon reducing, actually we do have an urgent obligation to fulfill that. So I think issue by issue, we work out what the start and stop point of the state's role is, but we've got to, we have to make change. The state has to promote and encourage it.
That's useful. That's really insightful. Rangatira Ma, a single question for all of you, please no more than a minute each. What are some of the things that your government would be doing to decrease the reliance on people like myself, decrease the need for us as consultants and contractors? What is it that you will do to ensure the independent professional public service is looked after, is cared for? A minute each, please. Jan, we'll begin with you. We'll go to Simeon and then Andrew. Thank you.
The first thing is acknowledging the importance of the public sector, and for us having that plan around the cross public sector pay, as well as ensuring that there is training and secondments, and that we're valuing people's expertise and enabling them to have that sense of satisfaction in their work. And for me, I've got a particular hobby horse around wanting to see more return of those skills around community development and engagement, and that work to be valued within the public sector. And some might consider it backroom, but I think it's pretty essential to the work. And I see too much of that being contracted out at the moment because some of those skills were lost. And I think that having a centre of training and education for our public sector where that vision can be developed slightly independent of political ambitions, I think could really help strengthen the capacity and capability within the sector, and Te Tiriti being a core part of that, obviously.
Thank you, Jan. Jan, I'm old enough to remember, as a former public service, the Community Development Group. Thank you. Simeon, thank you.
Thank you for the question. We've made it very clear that there needs to be a reduction in the amount being spent on contractors and consultants. And too many times you hear anecdotal stories of public servants leaving their job, coming back as contractors and getting paid twice as much. And so firstly, what we're going to do is put in place consultant and contractor departmental specific caps with quarterly reporting for chief executives to be reporting against. Obviously, this will vary according to the different agencies and the work programs that they have to do, because obviously there's a number of departments will rely on that for particularly around infrastructure development, etc. We want to ensure that the use of contractors in the public service to perform the work of full-time employees is not becoming standard practice. We want to see public servants undertaking those roles rather than them simply being outsourced, which is becoming a greater and greater trend. The other point I'd make is we're seeing a significant amount of this government's agenda costing huge amounts in terms of consultancy fees. If you give the example of light rail in Auckland, there's been about $144 million spent on that particular project, but actually no outcome being made because ministers in the government have failed to actually make the key decisions. They haven't decided what the route will be. They haven't decided what the mode will be. They haven't decided how it's going to be funded. And so despite the fact this government's had 6 years in office, all that's happened is the wheels have been spinning, costing taxpayers millions of dollars. So having clarity from government about what is expected, what projects are being pushed ahead, which ones are not going ahead, I think will create significant savings within the public service when it comes to contractors and consultants.
Thank you, Simeon. Andrew, last word to you, my friend. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, so I think the critical thing is opportunities for training and growing and developing skills. I think the second point is, which is what we're trying to achieve through the Public Service Act, is the ability for public servants at whatever level of their career to move seamlessly between departments. So rather than going from one department to another and its termination of employment and then day one employee with a new department, actually see it as a public service career where you can move through different departments without a loss of pay and conditions and benefits. So moving to a more rationalised sort of pay and employment structure is very important. But as some of the people in the comments have said too, actually continuing that journey of lifting pay and pay reflecting the level of skills and profession that our public servants demonstrate every day. I mean, it has become very easy, in my observation, for the heads of public organisations to take recourse to the big four consultancy firms or various others, because you can get a fixed price for a discrete piece of work. The discrete piece of work may not get what you want, but you do it because you can sort of tick off that has been done. So I think working our way through those sorts of things is critically important. There will always be a place for project management and for discrete projects. So, for example, putting in place the the 1,000 extra or more than 1,000 extra frontline mental health roles that we put in place over the last 3 years required a project management approach. And so it's right to have a consultant for that sort of thing.
That's magic. Look, my friends, our time has come to an end. Thank you so much, everyone, for the questions. Stunning questions. Thank you for orientating us and helping us. Look, for those of you who didn't get the questions answered through this, what we're going to do, what the team's going to do is pull those together and put them to our panelists to get some more insight or refer to some more information. So we see this as the start of the conversation. I'll now offer a karakia, but can I also just thank our panelists and remind everyone to vote. Democracy matters, you matter to democracy. So with that in mind, a karakia written by Rahui Papa to remind us of looking after one another even though we are working. Tūria tūria te matahau no rangi, tūria tūria te matahau no papa, paihiratia te tangata ki te kawa tūpua, ki te kawa tāpito. He kawa ora, he kawa ora, he kawa ora ki te tangata, he kawa ora ki te whānau, he kawa ora ki te iti ki te rahi, he kawa tataki ki au mai ai, tūtiru o whiti, whakamaua ki tīna, hoi tahi ki e. To our panelists, noho mai rā I roto I ngā manakitanga katoa. We wish you health, we wish you safety on the trail, and we wish you some joy over the next few weeks. Thank you for your service so far, and we wish you, we wish you luck. We wish you luck and goodwill. So with that in mind, whānau, thank you for your messages. Ka kite, haere rā, farewell, adieu. Adieu to you, and you.